There, it's Lara here. Welcome to Witchy Wednesday, your weekly astrology forecast. This one's for the week of October 30th to November 5th, 2019. Thanks for being here, and happy Halloween. Happy Samhain if you celebrate. Halloween is tomorrow, and it's lining up with Mercury Retrograde. So that's going to be the focus of our video today. But before we get there, I actually have a treat for you. It's the time of year for tricks or treats, right? So I have a treat for you, and you don't even have to do a trick for it. Well, maybe just a little one, but it's not a big deal. So if you're already on my email subscriber list, which you can do by my website, and there's a link below always to that, you would have received an email earlier today with a free gift for you. And what this is I made this 2-part guide to working with the moon. And so it is, excuse me, there's an audio, an MP3 for you to download. It's about 10 minutes long. And then there's an accompanying PDF. So it's all about the moon, her cycles, why it makes sense to work with her cycles, and about what the moon moving through the signs of the zodiac each month sort of favors, right? So if you're interested in that and you're not already an email subscriber, then please head over to my website, and all you have to do is put in, first name and email, and you're going to get those automatic downloads. So, and I'd love to know what you think once you check that out. So I've got that for you. And in the next few days, I will also be launching a new reading that's all based on the moon in your birth chart. So, we'll take a deep dive into the moon, all kinds of things. So have a look for that in the next few days if you're interested. And I have other stuff on the, on the horizon. It's been busy times, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you as well. So, but for now, that's it. Of course, if you're interested in getting a reading, you know where to find me. If you just, head on over to my website from the link below, you can do that there. Or you can also connect with me on Facebook and Instagram, and the links below are, or the links are below for those as well. So let's get on with it. Speaking of the moon, we've got the moon in Sagittarius as I'm recording this video on Wednesday. I have to look because I didn't write it down. And it entered Sag yesterday, and then it will move into Capricorn on Thursday. And after that, it will enter Aquarius on Sunday. And what else? Yeah, then Pisces next Wednesday. So actually, I'll show you this while I'm thinking about it. These date books are really great, and I get one every year. This one was given to me by a friend, actually, last Christmas. It's called the Witch's Date Book. You can also get them. They make various versions. It's not just Witch's Date Book, but there's some for like astrology, if that's more your thing. But it tells you when, among other things, when the moon is in certain signs. So that's a handy dandy thing if you're interested. So, and nope, I'm not getting I'm not getting paid to tell you that. I wish I was, but I'm not. So we've got that going on, and one of the things that I didn't really cover so much in what I'm about to talk about is the fact that we've got Venus is changing signs as well this week, and Venus is moving into Sagittarius. So Venus will move on out of Scorpio on Friday, and move into the sign of Sagittarius. And so it'll be a little more lighthearted, right? The Venus energies, a little more sort of optimistic, fun, that sort of thing. So, but what we really want to talk about, for the most part, is Mercury retrograde, right? And there are a couple of other things. Let's start with talking about Samhain, just briefly. So Samhain is sort of it's where Halloween originated, right? With the pagans. So it is the pagan or witches' New Year. And it sounds kind of weird, right? Because in our Western culture anyways, we celebrate the New Year in January, which has always seemed very odd to me and never really resonates. And then sometimes we think astrologically of the New Year as being in the sign of Aries, so kind of late March, early April, spring, when new life springs forth. And Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, right? At home in the first house. But in actuality, when you think about it, that birth can't happen without conception first, right? And that's the time we're in Scorpio season, starting in Scorpio season. So Samhain, we're in the darkest days of the year right now. And that's when, everything really begins in the darkness, right? It's where the deep work happens. If you think about it in terms of nature, it's the time of year when all the, the leaves are decomposing in the northern hemisphere. And if you have autumn in your area, but it's a good analogy, it's good symbolism. The leaves are decomposing, fertilizing the earth, and all of the life that's going to spring forth in the spring is really getting started now under the ground. And if that soil's not tended, right? If we don't pay attention to that, if we haven't done the, taken care to make sure that whatever is growing there is in this deep, rich soil, then that impacts the quality of whatever springs forth in the spring. And so, nothing of substance grows if we don't do the work now. So that's the idea of New Year, being around the time of Samhain, because this is when we really go inward and start to do the deep work of, what do we want to birth? What do we want to birth come spring? The work starts now. Astrologically speaking, Samhain isn't officially until the sun hits 15 degrees of Scorpio, and that's not until November 7th. So basically this whole week is a good time to kind of engage in that practice. I know especially people that are celebrating Halloween, and if you have kids, it's kind of a busy time, right? Costumes and trick-or-treating and all of this stuff, decorating. And so that can be a bit of a distraction in a way from the more sacred or ritualistic practices of Samhain, right? If you're interested in that kind of thing. But fret not, because you don't have to do those things right on the day. So you've got a window of time there to do that. And Samhain is a time of, it's said that the veils between the worlds are thinnest at this time, right? Meaning that we can connect with our ancestors more deeply and profoundly and this kind of thing. And one of the things that people who celebrate Samhain often do is they have something called a dumb supper. And essentially that's, a real simple way to articulate this and to practice it if you're interested is you can plan to cook, a special meal, maybe something that, a past relative really enjoyed or something like that, something that's a family favorite. And you can then set a place setting. And you just have to set one place setting, and you can invite, your ancestors to join you at the table and just honor them and acknowledge them. So that's one way of doing it. So I think that's all I want to say about that. I also want to mention to you that the North Node is still on the eclipse point, right? 10 degrees of Cancer. And I spoke about that in last week's video. So if you're interested in that, you can go back and listen. And I spoke about it in relation to the new moon in Scorpio, right? Which we're still riding the waves of right now. And speaking of that, we had Uranus in Taurus exactly opposing that new moon. And so that energy is still reverberating right now. So we may experience further twists and turns and surprises and insights and that kind of thing during this lunar cycle. It was interesting because right around the day of the new moon, 3 out of 4 of us in my household got sudden and really excruciating headaches. And then in speaking with some other people, they also had that same experience. So quite interesting, right? Uranus has to do with the collective consciousness, the higher mind kind of thing. So and the nervous system and all of that. So interesting. But we can also have, new opportunities, new insights, new information, new ideas, this kind of thing. And unexpected events come in still. I had a nice surprise in the form of email this morning, which was great because yesterday kind of sucked on a number of levels. So that was good. And Uranus is, like I said, it's sort of that collective hive, right? And so groups may be kind of where this energy comes into play, sort of the wider reach sort of thing. And also it's the use of technology, of the internet. It's the future. And so all of these factors may come into our experience in some way as well, right? Brought by Uranus. And I don't know, for some reason, when I was thinking about that, it reminds me of WikiLeaks. I don't know why. So who knows if something like that will transpire again. The other thing is Mars just squared the nodal axis. I spoke about that as well in last week's video. I think it was last week or the week before. And then Saturn made a square, or Mars and Saturn squared off these last few days. Remember, a square is a 90-degree angle, right? It's a conversation of tension between the planets involved. And we need to take some action to resolve the tension, particularly if we want to deal with it in a, the best way, the most optimal way. So, and now Mars is moving to square Pluto exact on November 5th. And of course, this is all in Capricorn, right? The Pluto Saturn, and Mars is in Scorpio. So I've got, Mars is not in Scorpio. Mars is in Libra still. Mars is moving into Scorpio. So Mars in Libra is squaring that energy in Capricorn. So it's like there's a lot of substance that we can get done right now, a lot of really long-lasting, substantial things. But there's also the possibility of tension, of frustration, of obstacles, of power struggles, of aggression even. It is an opportunity to be more assertive, but not aggressive. I say this all the time, right? So it's also possible that those power struggles can be internalized. And lead, like when that happens, sometimes it leads to stagnation and this kind of, because we're like paralyzed by the tension, right? We're turning it all inwards rather than acting, rather than making our voices heard, taking the action we need to take, whatever the case may be. So we're internalizing that energy, and then we just become kind of like paralyzed, and then that sort of boiling inside of us is not good for us, right? So the optimal use of this energy is take action on things of substance, and do it with the best of intentions and in full integrity, right? That's what will serve you best. Also, something I've been working with a lot is using anger as a creative force rather than a destructive force. So over this past year, I've been working through a lot of pent-up anger issues, and that's come, full disclosure, that has come really to the forefront over this last month kind of thing in particular. I've had a bit of a breakthrough there. And so what I've been trying to do is use that Mars energy productively and proactively and creatively, right? Rather than destructively. So focus on, it's kind of like focus with intensity, right, Scorpio, on what's really truly important and what's significant, what's true, and don't get distracted by overwhelm. Easier said than done, I know, but like that's where the focus comes in. Remember last week we talked about Scorpio being one of the symbols of Scorpio being the eagle, right? Eagle eye focus. So it's that harnessing that energy to focus on what's really important. And if you kind of feel like you're trying to force a square peg into a round hole, then that's a sign, that maybe that's not the right direction for you right now. And maybe you're barking up the wrong tree, sort of thing. And maybe you should focus somewhere else, right? And that's where Mercury retrograde comes to save the day. So let's take a look at the chart quickly, and then I'll talk a little bit more about Mercury retrograde before I go through each of the signs. So here we have the chart for this Mercury retrograde, which just happens to be Halloween, Samhain. So you can see here at the time of this, tomorrow, Mercury will be stationing retrograde, right? And that is at 27 degrees of Scorpio. And I can't remember the exact time. It's like 11, I have it here somewhere. 11:41 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so Mercury is stationing. And then we've got Venus in Scorpio. And just about to move into Sagittarius. I mentioned that to you. We have the sun still in Scorpio, of course, for the next while yet. We also have asteroid Pallas Athena in Scorpio, right? Remember, she's the asteroid of our creative intelligence and strategy sort of thing. There's Mars in Libra, not yet in Scorpio, but will transition into Scorpio. The moon has moved on to Sagittarius at this point. Jupiter in Sag, of course. And then Pluto, Saturn, South Node in Capricorn, which is squaring off that Mars energy, right? Remember we talked about that. North Node at 10 degrees Cancer on the eclipse point. Uranus still at 4 degrees Taurus there. And of course, Neptune in Pisces at 16. Going to go direct next month. And Chiron in Aries. So there you have what's going on in the sky. And let's talk a little bit about the Mercury retrograde. So I just said to you, Mercury retrograde's coming to save the day, which sounds a little bit weird and counter intuitive, or perhaps counter to what you hear out there in pop culture about Mercury retrograde. Is it true that we can have some technical difficulties, some communication issues, some breakdowns, some travel delays, all of this kind of stuff during Mercury retrograde? Absolutely true. However, there's a reason for that. If we find that all kinds of that stuff is happening to us, we need to pay attention to the message that Mercury retrograde is bringing us. Because what it's saying is you need to slow down. You need to take a step back. You need to reevaluate, right? And Mercury's the messenger god. So who had the ability to move between the worlds, right? So to relay messages back and forth between the higher and the lower realms. Think of that as symbolism for our external and internal worlds, right? And so Mercury rules communications, thoughts, ideas, messages exchanged, our self-talk, which not a lot of people talk about, but it does. Also rules travel, commerce, and the vehicles and the devices that we employ, for those things. So when Mercury retrogrades, like I was saying, it wants us to slow down. It wants us to pay attention, especially to those themes, all right? Communications, thoughts, ideas, that sort of, all those things I just mentioned. It wants us to review, reflect, repeat, reanalyze, reconnect, recover, regenerate, all of those words. It wants us to do all of that before moving on, right? Before moving forward. It wants us to plan and be prepared, to pay attention to the details, to think before we communicate. So these periods of Mercury retrograde are built into our lives, right? The universe has built this in for us 3 or 4 times a year to remind us how important it is to do this kind of work. So, excuse me. When Mercury retrogrades in Scorpio, it's a whole other level of going inward, because Scorpio is a very, very deep sign. So this can be a time of really profound revelations about what we have buried in our psyches, in the skeletons in the closet kind of thing, past traumas, recognition and insight into our obsessions, compulsions, fears that we've either kind of buried or projected onto other people, right? Oftentimes we do that there are things that we recognize in other people that we don't recognize in ourselves, right? And we all have those blind spots, and Mercury retrograde is a time to get some insight into what our blind spots are too. This is a time when secrets and hidden information can be revealed. We can have breakthroughs in our sort of intimate connections and communications with other people. Breakthroughs in communication in general, our thoughts and our ideas they tend to be more, and our communications tend to be more deep, more intense, more truthful, anything but superficial, right? While Mercury is retrograde in Scorpio. And so, with all of that in mind, now let's take a walk through each of the signs. And we're doing this based first and foremost on rising sign in these general forecasts, right? If you don't know your rising sign, please, you can get in touch with me for a reading and I will let you know that. Or you can work that out for yourself online. There's many free places to draw up charts if you are so inclined to do that yourself. But if you do know your rising sign first, moon sign, and sun sign. Okay, so all 3 of those will give you a more complete picture in a general sense still, right? Because this isn't a personalized reading, it's a generalized reading. So let's get started with Scorpio, because Scorpio, it's all about you this season, isn't it? All about you. And you're teaching us a lot of lessons and setting the example, Scorpio. So Mercury is retrograding in your sign. And if you have, particularly, I should have mentioned this before I started on Scorpio, but if you've got planets, points, around the 27-degree Scorpio mark, or 27 degrees-ish of the fixed signs, give or take, you'll probably be feeling this. If you are a Mercury-ruled sign like Gemini or Virgo, you also tend to experience Mercury retrograde. But the sort of like the more experience you have with it, the easier it is for you to manage because it's an energy you're familiar with. Okay, so Scorpio, this is happening in your first house. And so there is this opportunity to move inward and to do all that reevaluating, reconfiguring, rethinking, all of those things I mentioned in the introduction, reflecting in particular in relation to yourself, right? So your journey through, your trajectory through this life, your physical body and appearance and vitality, your approach, right, to the world. So how you come across, kind of thing, how other people perceive you, who you appear to be out in the world, sort of thing. So all of these things are on offer for you to kind of reflect on and review on and tweak and all of this. And I think a good question to ask yourself at this time is, am I operating in integrity? So is who I appear to be on the outside, first house, really who I am and who I feel myself to be, right? It's a good time to work on aligning those things. So that's for you, Scorpio. And we're going to move on to Libra now, where we've got Mercury retrograding in your second house, Libra. So this is a time for you over these next few weeks to really reflect on, review, pay attention to the details, reevaluate things concerning your personal resources. So your money, your personal values, like what you value, your material possessions, your relationship to those, and your sense of self-worth. It's a time to really go deep with these things and to spend some time, asking yourself, what do I need to kind of take care of, right, in this department, particularly in relation to those themes I was talking about in the introduction. And it might be, on a practical level, a really good time for, a money review in terms of your banking. It might be a review of if you are somebody who, charges certain prices for whatever it is that you do for work. If you're self-employed, for example, it might be a good time to review that. It might be a good time to review your personal, values and that kind of thing. So that's for you, Libra. And we're going to move on to Virgo now, where we've got Mercury retrograding in your third house. So Virgo, Mercury is your ruler, right? And so you tend to manage Mercury retrograde for the most part pretty well, although there can be some instances of getting overwhelmed, because you are an analyzer to begin with. And so when we, especially with Mercury and Scorpio, when we're really pulling things apart and going deep, this can be a bit anxiety producing for Virgo, but you also in some ways tend to thrive on that, right? So, and with Mercury retrograding in your third house, this is the house of Mercury. So the house of communications and of thoughts and our immediate environment. And so with Mercury retrograding there, it's an opportunity for you to really do some deep work in this area, to review and reflect and fine tune your communications, and your thought processes. And it could be like on a more kind of tangible level. It could be like you working on some kind of writing piece, for example, that you're really editing and reviewing and that sort of thing. You're in that phase right now. It could be some bumps on the road in communications, and you having to work through those and see how you can tweak that so that moving forward things go more smoothly. The good news, Virgo, I will say to you, is that once this Mercury retrograde period is over, so Mercury stations direct on the 20th, 21st of November, Mercury becomes visible in the sky. This is really powerful for you as a Mercury ruled sign. And so you can feel like things are finally clicking in that department and really flowing and really moving forward. So that's something to look forward too. But right now, it's time to do the work, right? Which I know you're no stranger to that, Virgo. So, that's what's going on for you. And we're going to move on to Leo now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 4th house, Leo. So this is an opportunity, Leo, for you to really take stock, to review, to reflect, to go deep. All those things I mentioned in the intro in relation to these Mercury retrograde energies in your 4th house of your home and your family and your roots and your place of living and your ancestral karma, what you've inherited from ancestors, these kinds of things. So this could be like again, on a sort of more tangible level, this could be you redoing or renovating your home in some way, Leo. This could be you working on the nitty gritty with some family members. This can be potential, bumps in communication, or maybe, some malfunctioning of some kind of electronic or something like that in the home. Or in relation to your tribe kind of thing, your close family members, even the mother or mother nurturing figures in your life, can be kind of implicated in this. But again, if you're, like I said in the intro, if you're feeling that things are really going off kilter and a lot of these typical Mercury retrograde things are happening, it's a real big cue to slow down and to really ask Mercury, what am I supposed to be paying attention to right now, right? And for you, it's really in relation to that 4th house. So that's what's going on for you, Leo. And we're moving on to Cancer now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 5th house for the next few weeks. So Cancer, this is a time for you to do that reevaluation work, that inner reflection, revisit, revamp, regenerate, recuperate, all of these things in relation to your children that you work with, or are associated with, your inner child, what sparks joy for you, right? So how you have fun. These can be hobbies, special interests, especially it can be sports related even, but this is the house of your individual creative self-expression, right? So, and how we kind of have fun in life. So it's time to review this area of life for you, Cancer. And maybe, there are some details that need to be taken care of that you've kind of put on the back burner, and that you need to address at this time. This can be some bumps in communication in relation to those things, right? Or some, some technological issues in relation to those things. And again, if that's happening for you on a really a bigger than usual kind of scale, and you're noticing that, then it's really a message for you to really, okay, what's Mercury trying to tell me here? I need to slow down. I need to do this reflection and review in this life area before moving forward. I need to take care of the details here, right? So that's for you. That's for you, Cancer. And we're going to move on to Gemini now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 6th house. So Gemini, you are also, just like Virgo, a Mercury ruled sign. And so you tend to really feel these Mercury retrogrades. And like I said to Virgo, the good news is that when Mercury stations direct around the 20th, 21st of November, Mercury also becomes visible in the sky. And so this is really good news, because this is a message and some support for really moving forward with these Mercury related things and being able to see the work that you do now and even before manifested, right, in the outer world. But now it's time to do the inner work, Gemini, in relation to your 6th house in particular. So that has to do with your daily routines, the daily grind kind of thing, your health and wellness, the routines around that and health and wellness in general. It has to do with your kind of activities of daily living and how you are in service, whether that be like those paid or unpaid tasks. It doesn't really matter. This can also, hmm, um, it really speaks to your how you spend time on the day to day. So it's time to evaluate this, right? And evaluate your daily routine. Is it working for you, Gemini? Or do things need to be tweaked? Do things need to be kind of cleaned up in this area? Do you need to um, take care of the details here? Maybe review your schedule, review, your health and wellness routines, and reflect on that, on what's been working for you and what hasn't. And then come later in November, when Mercury stations direct, you'll be able to move forward based on the work that you've done now. This can also be, some bumps in communications and even technology and equipment, that kind of thing, that you use on the daily basis, or that you kind of have in that arena of health and wellness and routines and that kind of thing. So something to watch for, but definitely a time for reviewing that area of your life, Gemini. So moving on to Taurus now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 7th house, Taurus. So this is the house of your closest personal relationships, right? Those one-to-one relationships, whether that be a significant other, close friendships, business relations, people you're in partnership with in some way, that kind of thing. And so when Mercury's retrograding here, this is a message that it's time to reflect on this, right? Reflect on those one-to-one relationships. Do some details need to be taken care of in relation to these, one-to-one relationships? Do communications need to be worked on? Like, you may experience some, mixed communications or some communication bumps along the road in your close personal relationships. Some kind of, breakdown in communications in a sense, but that's not just to be a pain in the ass, Taurus. That's to encourage you to focus on that and to work through those details so that things can be better moving forward, right? And the inner work that you're doing now, reflecting on that, all of that, and that area of life, and reviewing that, will bear fruit. If you do the work now, come the end of November, you'll be able to move forward there in a more smooth way. So that's for you, Taurus. And we're moving on to Aries now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 8th house, Aries. And so this is the house of Scorpio, right? Mercury's retrograding in Scorpio. And so this is about really deep inner reflection. It's about really getting at those things that we've got kind of buried deep down inside, about reviewing those and reflecting on them, and maybe some realizations, some reintegration of those parts of ourselves that we have cut off, which is usually done for a very good reason. It's usually done for, to protect ourselves. And so we can review these things and review the sort of intimate connections in our lives and, our relationship to vulnerability. We can also, in a more practical sense, it can be a review of those resources that we share with others, meaning things like taxes, insurance payments, mortgages, debt, inheritance, any of that kind of thing, right along those lines. So it could be a good time for review in that area. And then when Mercury stations direct later in November, in a few weeks' time, it will be time to move forward and see the external manifestation of the inner work at that time. So that's for you, Aries. And we're moving on to Pisces now, where we have Mercury retrograding in your 9th house. So Mercury in Scorpio in the 9th. Pisces, for you, this is a time of reflecting on kind of the bigger picture, right? On your philosophies and your belief systems. This can have to do with review and reevaluation and reconnection and reintegration, all those things I talked about in the intro, in relation to teaching, learning, publishing, I already mentioned sort of your philosophy and belief system. It can also have to do with travel and particularly sort of on the grander scale, and with foreign cultures, foreign people, people that are quote unquote foreign to us. So Pisces, it's a time of reflection and review and all of that in relation to these things. It could be like, you're planning some larger scale trip, and now is the time to work on the details of that, right? And really carefully evaluate everything there. Or some course of study you're embarking on. So you're really going deep as far as that's concerned. So that can be a couple of ways it plays out. So that's for you, Pisces. And we're going to move on to Aquarius now, where we've got Mercury retrograding in your 10th house, Aquarius. So this has to do with your public reputation, your persona, your worldly ambitions, your relationship to authority and authority figures, your career, right? Your more like your vocation, your true vocation. And it's really about the legacy you wish to leave. And so these next few weeks while Mercury's in retrograde is a time for you to reflect on, to review, to revisit, to take care of the details, to go inward with all of those things and do the inner work, so that when Mercury stations direct in a few weeks' time, you've done that work, and then you begin to see the external evidence of that, in the outside world when Mercury goes direct. So, and if there's a lot of kind of miscommunication and things like that happening in that area of life, Aquarius, that is a real message for you to listen to Mercury, right? To slow down in that area and to do that Mercury work. So that's for you, Aquarius. We're going to move to Capricorn now, where we've got this retrograde of Mercury happening in your 11th house, Capricorn. So this is about reevaluating, revisiting, reviewing, reflecting on, turning your inwards inward as far as your connection to groups, right? Friendship groups, organizations, clubs, associations, networks, including sort of internet groups would fall into this category. It also has to do with, it's like the people that are walking the same path as you, and it has to do with your vision for the future, your hopes and dreams for the future. So it's time to reevaluate that area of life, Capricorn. And if you're finding that there are glitches happening for you here, then it's really important to focus on this and to evaluate and to slow down and do this internal work, so that come later in November, when Mercury stations direct, you can reap the rewards of that work, right? You can see that external manifestation of what you've been working on the inside. So that's for you, Capricorn. Sagittarius, last but not least in this case, Mercury is retrograding in your 12th house. So this is really, deep work, turning inward, reflecting, reviewing, taking care of business in terms of your unconscious, your kind of self-sabotaging habits, it can have to do with doing deep dream work and getting messages from your dreams. It can have to do with communication with the unseen. It can have to do with really focusing on your spiritual life at this time and taking care of that. So Sagittarius, that's for you, and sort of like your kind of mental spiritual health, potentially even surrounding things like hospitals, ashrams, retreat centers, hospices, prisons, detention centers, rehab facilities. This kind of thing can come into play in the 12th house. So doing the work, that inner work now, right? Internalization of the Mercury energy. Then in a few weeks' time, you begin to see how doing that work benefits you in the long run, right, Sagittarius? So that's for you. And that's all 12 signs. I hope that you enjoyed this forecast and that it was helpful. Don't forget to go over to my website and grab your free Working with the Moon guide, okay? So take good care. Happy Samhain, happy Halloween, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.